Hi everyone, welcome back to Lecture 3, Strategic Analysis of MKT340 Strategic Marketing Management. Whoops, sorry about that. Okay, in this lecture today we're going to focus on the analysis or the overall development of opportunities, I suppose, and threats that surround us. And as you can see, strategy is rather a linear process where we start with the organisation mission and objectives up here, which we discussed last week, and now we're starting to look at how we analyse or start the planning process by looking, I suppose, at macro environment outside the organisation. So the focus on this lecture, what is meant by strategic style. This might influence how we might go about our planning and how we might want to deal with challenges in the environment. More on that later. The steps involved in a comprehensive and thorough situation analysis, so this idea of internal, near and far environment. The steps in developing a problem and opportunity statement. All these of course are related to your assessments because this is what you need to do in your second assessment. So this slide, just taken from the text, shows you some of the approaches that an organisation may choose. The first is that they would need to make an assessment of the predictability of the environment, the business environment. Is it low or high? The cutoff might be 50% here, but generally these are management calls based on experience, judgment and evidence. Malleability is how much we think we can affect the environment, not infect. So in other words, when it's predictable, predictability is high, and we think we have high impact, then the organisation, the industry, is able to be predicted and can be changed. If, on the other hand, predictability is low, but we believe we can have some impact, we would call that a shaping, and so on. So I'll go through and discuss each of these approaches. So the adaptive strategy, which is the first one up here, is where predictability is low and our impact that we can make is low. This is appropriate for organisations, as I've said, competing in an unpredictable environment. Flexibility and experimentation strategy is a key because it's unlikely that one strategy will have one long-term effect. Universities around the country are very much in this position now, given the unpredictability, government policy changes in demographics, the globalisation of that industry. A classical strategy, on the other hand, is appropriate for organisations in relatively stable environments where it would not be possible for a competitor to influence dynamics. Porter's competitive model, the relative business value chain and game theory holds here. Fast-moving consumer goods, pharmaceuticals, financial services and Australian airlines are good examples of this type of industry. The shaping strategies where organisations are in predictable organisations where the environment is unpredictable, and malleable. The early days of the digital and social media revolution characterise this market now, or you might look at the music market moving more towards streaming as an example of that as well. Also can be used in a fragmented and mature industry, which you tend to see a bit of turbulence as well. Apple and iPhone and tablets is a good example of this. The visionary strategy works in business with environment which is predictable and malleable. IBM moving to providing services rather than just IT is an example of this. So they're really trying a visionary strategy. United Parcel Service and e-commerce, and Virgin pursues this strategy in a number of organisations and other markets. So that's some of the approaches, and that might influence how an organisation would then deal with the next bit. The situation analysis then contains the following aspects, as you can see on the slide here. To identify the forces that are potential drivers of change, determine the likely impact of these forces of change and to make assumptions about the future, determine how our organisation is positioned and to compete successfully in that future. So here we're not really starting to look so much at market behaviour, but I suppose at the factors that influence markets. Just an idea of how organisations in the planning process and what they should be focusing on, all these things interact. So customer needs will interact with our skills, the context we find ourselves, any collaborators we might have in industry networks, competition, and so on. Now remember, I talked about the near environment, internal capabilities, and the remote environment. We might start by looking at our organisational wide capabilities. Resources are the capabilities are often discussed here, our strengths in marketing. The near environment deals with a competitive review, looking at distribution channels, customers, and supply. We'll talk about the near environment with Michael Porter's 5-factor model. Then we move out to the remote environment. These are the factors which are really influencing the structure of markets and competition. Our economy, social, cultural, political, legal, technology, and changes in our natural environment. So in looking at the remote environment, this is often the most difficult for organisations, and really we have to start with a process of analysis, which is decomposition, diagnosis on what we do about that. So analysis, by the way, would mean which of these forces, so we know that global warming is important, is it important to our business? Is it really important to our business strategy? Diagnosis, what are we going to do about that change? And prognosis, what is likely to happen, and what is the forecast and how we're going to deal with it as well. So all these three things are often used in reviewing the remote environment. What this means to you in your assignment, well, you need to state your assumption scenario of the forecasted trend for every external environmental factor. Now that sounds like a daunting challenge, but there are a few guidelines that we'll talk about in this lecture that might help you. You need to determine what this means in opportunities and threats for each environmental factor. Some will be more important than others. Then, rate each opportunity and each threat for every factor on a 5-point scale according to its degree of significance. Then, on a likelihood of occurrence. Now you get the idea. Obviously what you need to focus on are things that have a high degree of significance and a high degree of occurrence. So the result is a double-digit rating that indicates the significance of each opportunity and threat and the likelihood of their occurrence. So this might be some scenarios. So you can see here 1 to 5, high significance, low probability. Really what we look at here is that we really need to plan for scenarios in the first two, where there is a high significance, high probability, and we need to have contingency plans for a high significance, low probability. Low significance, high probability is something that managers should be able to deal with, so we don't need to plan for that. And low significance, low probability is something that can be safely ignored. Of course, I won't go through the many changes in the competitive environment around you, in the macro environment around you. That is something you'll need to do in your analysis. Okay, so Porter's 5 forces model, which has been around since the early 1980s, is a nice way of looking at the near environment, and it's made up of these factors: the rivalry within the market, which occurs also when markets slow down. So if there's a slow growth market, competitive rivalry will get bigger. Threat of new entrants, bargaining power of suppliers, threat of substitutes. These are, so for example, we're seeing the popularity of substitutes grow in electricity generation, solar and wind, bargaining powers of suppliers who supply us, and bargaining power of buyers who we sell to. In terms of competitive rivalry, Porter makes these very wise generalizations, and they tend to be true. With a slow industry growth that I mentioned, lack of differentiation, so we've got organisations doing pretty much the same thing, low buyer switching costs, so people can move very easily, high fixed costs, so there are a lot of investments that firms need to meet, overcapacity, so for example we have too many aircraft, too many hotel rooms, perishable products and services, and high exit barriers. High exit barriers might be not being able to find a suitable buyer to bail you out, as in the case with Channel 10, or it might mean that the organisation doesn't want to leave that market because of regulatory controls or even emotional attachment from the owners. Bargaining power of buyers, we've got a few large buyers, the buying volume is large and so on, as you can see down here. This really impacts negatively on the competitive forces within the industry. The buyer has full market information, the buyer company could forward integrate and become a competitor. So buyers, for example, retailers have strong bargaining power in Australia because of their concentration. They have the threat of forward integrating. There are low switching costs for them going from one supplier to another, and the buyer is a low profit earner. So margins are particularly tight in retailing. So that really creates incentive for buyers' bargaining powers in retailing to drive competitive rivalry for, I suppose, primary producers. Threat of new entrants, where the barriers are low, there are no cost advantages for existing, a lack of product differentiation, low capital costs, and relatively easy access to distribution channels. We can see this in e-commerce and online shopping. Then we have the threat of new entrants, and of course that creates greater competitive forces. When there are only a few large suppliers, the supplier's product is highly differentiated or unique, the seller sells the same product to other industries, or the supplier could forward integrate and enter a market. Markets with high supplying power in the past used to be the oil industry. Certain resource companies can often will try and get greater bargaining power of suppliers. Other greater examples of bargaining power of suppliers might include companies that make Intel in computer processing, or the other really interesting one is silicon in producing for computers, rare earth metals for iPhones and smartphones and touchscreens and so on, or lithium for lithium batteries. Substitute products. When the products are close to performance and there are low switching costs, switching is a commonplace occurrence. So as I've said, threat of substitutes is becoming to be higher in areas like electricity generation in Australia. And so that's hopefully will start to make the market more competitive. How to use this model? Well, drawing on the 14 potential driving forces, which are less in your text, this aids as a determining is the future shape and attractiveness of market. Use them as a checklist to see where the market is headed. Is it headed for more competition, less competition? Port is important because you need to meet consumer needs better than your competition, and all these factors show you about the nature of competition. Is it high or low or so on, and Porter provides a useful model for that. Another one you're probably familiar with is the product life cycle. This is often also called an industry evolution cycle or an industry life cycle. And you can see here, this is characterized by introduction growth with some competitive turbulence, maturity, where most of Michael Porter's work is. There may be a life cycle extension, but there also may be a decline as well. So the summary of opportunities then is to look at the probability of occurrence and to graph them on these scales of probability of occurrence from 1 to 5 here and significance from 1 to 5 here, and to focus on the high to high sections here. The low to low sections, of course, can be ignored. Right, so really our top concern should be along here. We also should do the same thing for threats around us. So opportunities, we should position the company for that. Threats, we should create what's often called contingency plans here as well. So some of the internal capabilities of interest to us, and these are covered in the text. So now these things are not used to be just about resources, but capabilities such as your structure, your systems, your ordering systems, your credit systems, your management systems, your reward systems, the type of staff, skill, values of the organisation. In terms of marketing on the left-hand side, you can see things like market intelligence, planning, market strategies. So the actual way that we plan and organise our marketing in an organisation is in itself a capability and a resource. McKinsey, who've looked at this, these are worldwide consultants, have come up with what they call the 7 S model, which looks at the relationship between strategies and structure, systems, style, often called culture, shared values and skills, and so on. And what this model shows you, these things are not independent but rather interlocking. So you really should prepare each internal factor over how well it fits the following opportunities and threats, whether it's extremely significant, not significant, and so on. The final stage of the situation analysis then is the preparation of a list of properties and opportunity statement. Assessment of the organisation's capabilities. This often can be gained from secondary research, from which in your case, or of course you could be doing it by management interviews as well. Identification of future opportunities, threats facing the organisation, include particularly competitive, and the strategic implications, the issues and challenges that the organisation will need to face in its marketing plan. That's it for now. There's of course much more in your textbook and online topics for more information. Thank you for your attention.